Andy, how are you, man?
Good, good.
Good to see
Apologies for
you.
my lateness.
How late are you? Not even 5 minutes, mate. That's pretty
Yeah,
good. Anyways, mate, let's. I think most of the people on our team are pretty familiar with you and definitely with precision hydration. But we're going to post this up on the blog too. So I think why don't we start by giving? Why don't you just give a quick introduction to yourself and precision hydration, and then we'll dive into more on the energy products.
sure. So yeah, as Ben said, some of you might have been on a previous webinar or read some of our stuff, but yeah, I'm Andy Blow, the founder of Precision Hydration. We're a small company, a growing company out of the UK. We founded in 2011, and the origin story, if you like, was that as a triathlete, I really suffered in the heat. I would perform reasonably well in cold conditions, and then went to Kona to do the Ironman, went to Nice to do the World Long Course Championships. I actually raced in Thailand as well. And whenever it was hot or hot and humid, my races seemed to fall apart catastrophically. And it took me a number of years to go through this frustrating process of figuring out that I do sweat a lot. I have a very high sweat rate. That's always been obvious. But what I didn't know as a young athlete was how much salt I lost in my sweat. And it turns out I did a sweat test in a hospital with a friend of mine who's a doctor. And he pointed out that my sweat sodium losses are very, very high. And any of you familiar with those sort of numbers, you know, my sweat losses are nearly 2,000 milligrams per litre, usually about 1,800, 1,900 milligrams per litre. So when I sweat a lot in hot and humid conditions, I lose tons of salt, which then over several hours was having catastrophic effects on my homeostasis and my performance. I would basically end up in a medical tent a lot of the time, feeling very unwell, had hyponatremia and a lot of cramping, a lot of all the the horrid issues you see with people struggling in the heat. The interesting bit about it was, though, after I had my sweat test, and the doctor I was working with said to me, you know, he advised me on a new strategy for taking in a little bit less fluid and a lot more sodium during my races. It was like a light bulb had gone off. And although I'd never lie and say that my preferred racing temperature was the heat, I managed to put out some really good performances, much closer to the level of performance I would have hoped to do in the hot weather. And so that was like a massive sort of turning point for me. Although it happened quite late in my racing career, it did instill me with a huge amount of confidence that actually athletes are not sort of able to tolerate the heat or not. I'd always assumed I was just someone who could not tolerate the heat. I found that with a relatively straightforward change to my nutrition hydration intake, I could actually cope in the heat. And so precision hydration kind of was born out of that, because as I retired as an athlete, I was working as a sports scientist, coaching athletes, much in a very similar setup to what Coached has, you know, a sports science lab and individualized training programs. And we did sweat testing as Ben and Jim do as part of that process. And gradually that took off until we got to the point where we decided to focus solely on the sweat testing and hydration. And one of the things that enabled us to turn it into a viable business was the fact that sports drinks in general, we were being asked to recommend hydration plans off the back of the sweat test, and the sports drink market was very homogenous. Although there's loads of products, they're fundamentally, a lot of them are the same. They have a low amount of sodium, a high amount of carbohydrate, and fancy colors and flavors, but not a lot of anything else. So we innovated a multi-strength range of electrolytes with varying degrees of sodium in them, and some algorithms to work an online test and also the physical sweat test that Ben and Jim do, in order to sort of recommend a starting point for which is the best, you know, strength of product for you based on your physiology, the environment you're in, and the type of workouts and sessions you're doing. That has been, and we've been on a mission to sort of educate athletes for the past 10 years about all of this. We've got a growing group of, you know, fantastic partners around the world, Ben and Jim and Coach being the people who represent us in Singapore and have done for many years. And it was really to transition into what we're doing a little bit more now. We, over coronavirus lockdown, we, like a lot of people, had time to stop, sit and reflect on what we're doing. And we used to go to a lot of sporting events. We would have been in April of 2020, we would have been at the London Marathon Expo. And we sat down as a group on Zoom and said, like, we can't go to the Marathon Expo. It's not on this year. What are we going to miss from doing that, both individually and also in terms of business opportunity. And the consensus was that the biggest thing we got out of that was not revenue from selling products, but actually time talking to athletes one-to-one, learning what they needed so that we could improve our offerings. And we put out a little email to our database saying, look, we're not going to be at the London Marathon, obviously, but we were going to miss talking to you guys. You can book a free one-to-one video call with us for 20 minutes to talk about your hydration and nutrition and your goals while you're training in lockdown, etc. And we thought we'd get a few bookings, and we got like 80 bookings in the first day for calls. So we had to tool up really quick to deal with that. And then what's happened is it's literally that has just rolled on, and we're still doing it now. So we found this untapped need in people to want to sit down and talk to some experts about their hydration and nutrition to dial it in. And what was evident from those calls was that 95% of them, we talked about hydration. And then the next question people would say is like, and what do I do about my energy intake, my carbohydrate intake? So, you know, that was the genesis then of the idea to say, okay, well, why don't we sort of do for fueling what we've done for hydration, look at educating around, you know, how much carbohydrate people need to take, in what format, why, how to combine it with hydration. And that led us on a sort of like nearly a year-long journey to building carb calculator tools, to building a suite of hydration products, fueling products to complement the hydration range. And that's where we've ended up now.
So that was going to be my first question, actually, is how long have you been working on this? That's actually a faster turnaround than I would have thought.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, we've been talking about it for 5 years. And so we've been whiteboarding stuff. I dug out an old folder on my computer when we had a meeting about doing fueling products in 2014. So it was really the coronavirus gave us the kick up the backside that we needed to get on with it. You know, it was that massive shift in perception because we were just busy day to day, like running the business and not being able to look ahead. But yeah, so we had a lot of the concepts, you know, a lot of that brainstorming stuff was in the can. The time consuming bit was working. We were very particular about the formulation of the products and, you know, the manufacturers that we wanted to work with. And of course, during lockdown, it was hard to pin people down, but we're a pretty determined lot. You guys, Jim and Ben, know Johnny very well. If you need something doing, Johnny will make it happen. So he got on, once we'd spec the products, he was absolutely relentless in getting the products formulated and tested. And then we were all out testing them. And then we brought the first 2 to market a few weeks ago.
I think that's a good thing about having high performance athletes on your team as well, right? Like, you've been an elite athlete. Johnny is an elite athlete, or has been an elite athlete as well. And I think some of the other members on your team are pretty high performing athletes as well, right? And I think often, obviously, you have to have some physical talent, but a lot of the time when it comes to high performance, it's very much about just showing up, doing the work, and having the drive. And I think if you're a person wired in that way anyway, if you go into something like business, you're going to come at it with that same high performance mindset, and you're going to be able to produce something pretty cool pretty quickly. So it's good that you've got such strong people on your team.
Absolutely, yeah. We couldn't have achieved half of what we've done without them. Yeah. So, you know, the fueling concept, if you like, to talk about the underpinnings of that. And you might be able to speak to this as well, Ben, as an experienced athlete. You know, you came through a similar era to me. The education around taking carbohydrate in during exercise. Just to be clear here, when I talk about fueling for exercise, there's a massive topic that we're sort of choosing to put to one side, which is day-to-day diet. You know, what we're talking about here is like fueling hard training sessions or races. So this is like fueling at times when you want to perform at your aerobic best for an extended period of time. I'm not going to pretend that day-to-day nutrition isn't incredibly complex and important, but if we look at that exercising window, when I think, you know, in the 90s, early 2000s, there was a bit of education out there about, you know, how much carbohydrate to take and that sort of thing, but the research was a lot younger. There was less consensus, and I certainly don't ever remember being sat down by a coach or a nutritionist or anything on that and really explaining to me like how much I needed to eat in a half Ironman or something like that. It was, you picked it up by reading magazines, talking to other athletes, trying stuff out, and it was quite a hit and miss process. These days, we seem to almost be in a like an opposite situation where there is, if you go online, there is a ton of resource on there about fueling for and hydrating actually for endurance performance, but loads of it is conflicting. And do you go full keto and not touch any carbs? Do you eat 150 grams of carbohydrate an hour? Is it somewhere in between? Does it matter if you have hydrogels or 2-to-1 glucose fructose? Do we need amino acids in our sports drinks? All this kind of stuff. It's just like, if you're not clued up on the important stuff, then it's a minefield. So we've always talked about this thing, even when we were doing hydration, we've talked about this thing called the 3 levers, which is that there's 3 levers you can pull nutritionally speaking when you're doing an endurance event. There's the amount of fluid that you take, very important to replace what you lose in your sweat. There's the amount of sodium that kind of goes hand in hand with that fluid and also your physiology. And the third thing is how many grams of carbohydrate per hour. If you get roughly the right amount of fluid, roughly the right amount of salt, and roughly the right amount of grams of carb per hour into your mouth during an endurance event, the rest will largely take care of itself. Then the only other thing you can really do is make a tactical or a pacing error. That's so we try and boil it down to like focus on those 3 things. Know your numbers for hydration, electrolyte replacement, and carbs. And the interesting thing with carbs is actually potentially it's easier to nail that down for an individual than it is the hydration side of things, because hydration requirements are very, very driven by the environmental conditions, because of the sweat and differences in sweat rate and electrolyte loss. So when we've talked endlessly about that, there's tons of resources on our website to help dial in people's electrolyte and hydration requirements. The carb stuff, there's a lot more published literature about the amount of carbs that seem to work for most people for different durations and intensities of activity. And it can kind of be summarized as like below an hour, if you're well fueled, carbohydrate's not massively going to help you. You should be able to get through an hour of hard exercise with glycogen stores, no problem. No fueling is not going to really help you. When you go to start going out to 90 minutes, 2 hours, there is definitely an advantage, but a small one, of starting to take some carbs in, and like 30 grams of carb an hour is generally like the ballpark figure, which I would tend to agree with as being recommended. Beyond that, beyond 2-3 hours, you might want to double that up to 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour, there or thereabouts. And then even beyond that, for people who are going very hard for very long durations, 4 or 5 hours plus, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that top athletes are taking in 90 or even 90 plus grams of carbohydrate per hour if their digestive systems can tolerate it. And whilst those numbers, I don't want to give the impression that those numbers are set in stone. It might be 45 grams for one person and 60 grams for another and 75 for another. It's within that framework that you can throw a net over 98% of athletes basically. And so one of the first things we did before even building our fueling products was build this thing called the quick carb calculator, which you can find on our website, and I can put it's on the page for the energy gels actually.
I'll share it, mate.
Yeah, you can share that, and then you can click so if you go into the gel and then just hit, that's exactly it.
So you can pick run, tell us, say you're going to run a 4-hour marathon, and then how hard will you be going? On the scale, Andy, is this purely based off like intensity, like maximal intensity, or is this more on effort?
This would be. If
you're running a 4-hour marathon and you're running it as hard as you possibly can, even though it's pretty much aerobic, would you put it over here?
You would put that up at racing because it's relative to your fitness level. If you're racing flat out, whether that's at 5 minutes a mile or 15 minutes a mile, it's to do with the intensity that your body's working at. So,
but the intensity of like a 5K is very different to the intensity of a marathon, right? But what you're saying is it's like maximum intensity for that
for the duration.
Time.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gotcha. So then you click this, and here's your recommendation.
Yeah, and it's super simple. It's super quick. It gives you the idea with it is it puts you in the right zone. It's not going to give you that exact number, but it's going to give you that range. So in this case, 30 grams of carbs immediately before the activity. The reason for that, by the way, is that, you know, the theory there, which I'm quite a proponent of, is that for a lot of people, 15 minutes before your adrenaline levels are starting to rise, you're getting ready for the gun. When your adrenaline levels rise, you start to release, you start to dump glucose into the bloodstream. If you can augment that with an energy gel, you can spare some of your liver and muscle glycogen, because it will take about 15 minutes for that to hit your bloodstream. And then when you start running, you've got a little bit of extra fuel in circulation. There are a handful of people who seem to suffer with a little bit of a hypoglycemic dip if they do that, and so it's worth testing that you're not going to feel a bit crappy for a few minutes. But even in that circumstance, a lot of the research suggests that it doesn't affect performance. It might make you feel a bit rubbish for a few minutes early on, but if it's a long race, I'm a big believer in the advantage of the added fuel, over the duration. And then 60 to 90 grams of carb per hour, that's the sort of window for high performance over 4 hours. 90 grams is obviously going to apply to slightly bigger people who are running that bit faster, who've also got a pretty cast iron digestive system that know they can handle that. You might be closer to 50 or 60 grams if you're someone who's got a bit more of a delicate GI tract, or you've just not had the experience of trying to get as much carbohydrate down you. And as you can see in the recommendation here, the carb calculator will make some basic recommendations on different types of fueling formats, because obviously like energy bars are way less useful in a marathon than they might be on a long bike ride, whereas an energy a drink with carbohydrate is probably useful as part of a strategy for a marathon, because it's easier to get down, along with maybe energy gels, which are a lot obviously easier to consume on the move. So we try to make some recommendations, some basic recommendations there. I'm not saying that, for example, it's wrong to eat an energy bar in a marathon. If that's something that works for you, then you can do it. It's just that it's a bit harder to chew and digest. And, you definitely won't see anyone running at 5 minutes a mile trying to get a power bar down them in a marathon. They'll pretty much be on liquid calories or liquid and gels, for example.
For sure. So sticking to your idea of simplicity, you've launched 2 new fueling products, the drink mix and the gels. And just like you've done with your hydration products, you put the number smack bang in the front.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about each of these products and tell us how you formulated them, what's in them, when you would use one over the other?
Yeah, for sure. You're right. We've highlighted, I've got a couple here actually sat on the desk with me. So we've highlighted on the gel the important number, because what annoys me is, from a regulatory perspective, you have to have all this gubbins on the back of food products. And usually, if you want to know the carbohydrate content of an energy gel, you've got to get your magnifying glass out and look in a little table like that, when actually that is the most important piece of information that you need to know about that product. So also, I picked up one of our competitors' products that was lying around in my kitchen this morning, and had a look on the back. And that gel is the same size as this, but contains 22 grams of carbohydrate. A different flavour of their product contains 26 grams of carbohydrate per gel. Now, these aren't massive differences, but when we're basing all the advice on like 30, 60, 90, 120 grams of carb per hour, it just made total sense to us to like make a gel with 30 grams of carbohydrate in it and then put that number on the front. And so the gel, what we're not trying to do is, I'm sure there's a lot of noise around the world about products like Morton as a hydrogel product. They've done a fantastic marketing job. They've sponsored some incredible athletes. They've put out some good stuff, but all of the science shows that this thing about their hydrogel technology, how it basically empties from the stomach in a more controlled way than a regular non-gel product. It's all good in theory, and it has plausibility, and all the scientists will agree on that. But the papers that are published so far show 0 differences in performance. Yet they've marketed this product as like a revolutionary product, which is usually what happens in sports nutrition. Unfortunately, it's like, we've got this new product with amazing new features that's going to change your life. And if we're honest, they never do. And what we don't want to do is pretend that this is like something special. This is a small packet with a nice tasting gel in it, which is it is scientifically formulated, but it's 30 grams of carbohydrate, because that's what your body needs. It needs 30 grams of simple carbohydrate. We use a combination of maltodextrin and fructose to give us a 2-to-1 glucose fructose ratio, because that helps to speed absorption in the gut. That's very well established. But other than that, this is a pouch of 30 grams of carbs. So we don't want to undersell it, because it's a good product. But at the same time, what we don't want to do is make out that this is the game changer. Here isn't the product. It's knowing how many of these to take per hour and doing it and testing it in training and then executing it in a race that will make you go faster.
Out of curiosity, where does 30 grams come from? Because, if you look at most gels, they're somewhere in the region of 20 to 30 grams. Yeah. And I just wondered, is there a limit to how much you can put in that amount of volume? Or could you guys also make a 60-gram version so that you didn't have to carry so many gels, for example?
It's an interesting question. We spent a lot of time, because we made the first versions of the product that's inside here in the kitchen, like at home, mixing up home chemistry. What you find is that there's a trade-off between the viscosity and the water content, obviously, and the mass of the product and the carb content. So the more concentrated you make it, the thicker the gel becomes, but the more carbohydrates you can get in it. So some gels, if people are familiar with goo gels, they're very much on the side of being like a thick paste almost. So high carbohydrate, very low water content. You definitely need to chase them down with water. You'll get other gels, for instance, like SIS make isotonic gels, which are a lot more watery, but the volume of those, they'll be bigger in volume than this, so heavier to carry, but have less carbohydrate, around 20, 21, 22 grams of carbs per packet. So there's this kind of trade-off. We actually went for something, so we make this gel, and rather than being just a syrup, it is actually a gel. It's gelled with pectin, which you find in fruit, in order that we were aiming for like the highest carb content we could get in a reasonably small volume, but without making it. So I just ran this morning and had one of these without carrying a drink, for example, so the idea was you can consume it. I needed a drink when I got back, but you can consume this fine without water. That was the idea. When it comes to the idea of a bigger serving size thing, we are going to be bringing out a 90 gram of carb gel. So it's codenamed the jumbo gel at the moment. Whether that name will make it onto the packet, I don't know, but it's like a pouch with a resealable cap. So for a marathon, you might carry, if you were aiming for 90 grams of carb or 60 to 90 grams of carb for 2 to 3 hours, if you're a quick runner, you could just take 2 of those, job done.
Does it matter as you're running whether you take it all in one hit, or can you, if you had a screw top that you could put on and off, could you be just slowly sipping it across that hour? Would that affect performance?
It's very individual. We're working with Team DSM, Tour de France team, and there's guys there that will like smash 60, 90 grams of carb pretty much in one hit if the race is hectic, and you, as long as your stomach can cope with it, it's fine. I would say it's not ideal. I would say you probably want to be dripping it in every 20 minutes or so if you can, in ideal circumstances. But physiologically speaking, as long as you get that into your system without GI distress, it's less of a worry. I would always advise to spread it out, because the impact on your blood sugar and stuff is more even then.
Yeah, it's just with the gels as they are in that single-use packaging, right? Like it's hard to it's hard to and slow release those kind of gels. So I was just wondering, with the bigger one with the screw top, if that was beneficial or you'd advise.
I think it is, because I've been using them, and we've got prototype ones. I've been using them out on the bike, and I've been taking one of those out for a 2-hour bike ride. So I've been doing about 90 grams of carb over the 2 hours, and just kind of like sipping away at it at opportune moments, not really just dripping it out, probably having a little bit every 15 minutes or something like that. And that's a lot better, like I say, rather than having to just, if you don't want to chow a whole one down, and keep going.
Yeah, that's been my experience as well. Like, you're far better with a slow release if practically it's possible. So
interesting. I'm wearing a continuous glucose monitor.
I saw that earlier. I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, I've been using it to like test the impact of some of the products and things, as well as for general interest and health. And I definitely found that, I've been doing quite extreme tests at the moment, but I've definitely found that obviously if you drip in carbohydrates, as common sense as this would seem, you can maintain a much more stable blood sugar profile throughout a training session if you drip the carbohydrates in rather than leaving it a long time before you start eating. What's fascinating is it seems that wearing one of these really encourages you to eat, to fuel earlier in a session and a bit more aggressively than you would otherwise feel intuitively would be right.
Interesting. Did you see the Instagram post? I think it was this week that Eliud Kipchoge posted as well. He ran that last marathon he did with a continuous glucose monitor. And
yes, he did, yeah.
And he mentioned as well that he was taking a gel every 5K.
Yeah.
So for him, that's what, every 15 minutes?
Yeah, yeah, and that would have been at least 25 grams of carb, I would have thought, because we would be using the Morton gels, I suspect. So yeah, that tallies with what I've thought, is that, you know, like when you're going hard, and this doesn't apply to all, because people get confused because they think, oh, when I go out for a 2-hour ride, do I need to be taking a gel every 15 minutes? Like, no, you don't. If you're going out on the absolute limiter to go as fast as you can for 2-3 hours, then taking a gel every 15-20 minutes is undoubtedly, in my opinion, going to help you. Someone's put in the chat, I've seen, can the body physically absorb 90 grams of carbs an hour, and what is the rough maximum before it won't be absorbed and giving benefits? Which is like that is kind of like it's the killer question at the moment, really. And I would say that can the body physically absorb 90 grams of carbs now? Like, yeah, easily. Some bodies, you know, some bodies can absorb 140 grams of carb an hour, because I've got data on athletes that are routinely smashing 120 to 140 grams of carb an hour. I also got athletes that struggle beyond 60 grams. How much of that is due to like training, and how much of it is due to gut microbiome and gut function and that sort of thing is unclear, but it's individual, and you need to test it out. I can tell you categorically, I can cope with smashing 3 of these an hour for a considerable period of time, because in testing, that's what I've been doing. And, you know, it doesn't have any deleterious effects. We have other people though who insist they're limited to 2, you know. So the only way to get out and test that is to get out and test it in the real world. And
there's another question here too, asking whether the gels are gluten-free.
These, yes, they are, yeah.
Nice. Okay, so that sort of talks on the gel. Let's talk to the drink mix. When would you use a drink mix rather than the gel? Because they're also 30 grams, right?
So if you think about it, so that's 30 grams. This is a litre bottle. So I've got 2 servings in here. So that's 60 grams of carbs in 1 litre of fluid. So it's similar, a little bit less carbohydrate than your typical isotonic sports drink. When we measure this in the lab on the osmolarity, it's 213 milliosmoles per kilo, which is hypotonic. So it's actually still pretty good for hydration as well. It's lower tonicity than significantly lower tonicity than your blood, and it's got the same sodium in it as the 1,000 milligram pH product. So it's got that as well. So the key difference is if I talk about the similarities, first of all, if you have 1 serving of this and 1 serving of that, you're getting exactly the same ratio of carbohydrate, 2-to-1 glucose fructose, maltodextrin and fructose, and you obviously just the sort of I guess a simplistic way to look at it is to say this is a bit like one of these with a load of water added to it, you know. So this is 50 milliliters, and with this you're getting 500 milliliters. So we designed this to really be useful for athletes who are doing short course triathlon, for fast marathon running and such thing, where actually even eating a gel can be quite challenging when you're breathing really hard, when actually what you want is a bottle which does contain some carbs, some fluids and some electrolytes. So I've always talked in the past about the fact that actually a one-size-fits-all sports drink doesn't work for the longer races, and I'm still fully stand by that. I wouldn't see this being the principal fueling thing that someone would use during a long hot event, because you lose that ability to tune the sodium up and down, tune the carbs up and down and fluid up and down independently. But as part of a fueling plan for a long race, or as the sole thing you're going to have for, say, a 90-minute or 2-hour all-out effort, that's what we designed that for. So it's designed, and for example, if you were going for a high carb strategy over 2 hours, you might have this with this. But when you start having this with this over a long duration, that's when you probably, like with any sports drink and gel mix, you're probably going to start to see the gut being quite challenged by that level of carbohydrate without enough water. So in longer races, we'd be saying go for the gels along with a hydration tab, or a, something with just electrolytes, the sweat salt capsules. For shorter, faster stuff, this is when you need it all in one bottle. Or for instance, we work with these days quite a few canoeists and paddlers who they can't take their hands off to eat gels and stuff like that, so they need something they can suck through a straw. So this is that solution. But we're very clear about the fact that it's a drink, but this is in our fueling range, not the hydration range. Although it's going to hydrate you to an extent. The primary purpose of reaching for this is to get fuel rather than to get hydration.
Got it. And each of those products come in one flavor?
Yeah.
How come you haven't gone down the route of multiple flavors like a lot of the other brands?
Firstly, there's a very practical one, which is like a small business releasing a new product. We've got to constrain our spend on inventory, and the logistics of global fulfillment. We operate in 6 warehouses globally now. As you know from your experiences of us shipping pallets over to you and all that sort of stuff, like global logistics is a lot of fun with customs and all that sort of stuff. So it's simplicity out of the gates. It's to make sure that we can stock the warehouses and deliver product, which is the most important thing. The flavor profile of the drink is very similar. It's modeled on the flavor profile of the precision hydration products. So you will probably find that and we don't have a name for the flavor. It's precision hydration. We've never had a name for the flavor. We use a very mild citrus blend of natural fruit flavors for those, but it's as you know, you've had a lot of it. It's a very benign taste. It's not too sweet. The first thing most people say when they have this is, I was expecting it to be sweeter, and it's good that it's not. So it's not too sweet, and it's a mild citrus. The gels, we racked our brains and came up with the name, the original flavor, because we don't have a flavor. There is no flavor in this. It has a taste because it is a carbohydrate, so it's a little bit sweet, but there is essentially no flavor in there. And I really like that. And we've had fantastic feedback on it, because a lot of gels are quite strongly flavored.
Yeah, they get sickly after a while. That's the issue. Like, they taste okay in the short term, but then as you go longer and longer, and especially if you're pushing.
Yeah, the idea was to reduce that sort of taste fatigue. What the thing that we are going to do though is we're working on an energy chew at the moment, which isn't too far away. Hopefully that will come in 2 flavors to start with. So there's going to be an original neutral flavor in that, and we're very excited about that, because to give you an idea of how good it tastes, I've had to hide the box of the samples from my kids because they keep breaking it open and eating them. And we're doing that flavor, but we're also doing a menthol, mint and lemon flavor, which some people think that sounds weird, but then they have it, especially in hot weather, and it is the most refreshing thing. And then we're also working on a menthol mint version of the gel as well. That's a little bit further along the cycle, but the plan is to bring those out. And one of the reasons is that there is a little bit of research to suggest that menthol can help you make you feel cooler during hot weather. How impactful that really is on performance is debatable, but one thing's for sure is that in the testing we found, we definitely love that refreshing, like minty flavor. A lot of ultra runners that we work with will take chewing gum, with them, spearmint or fresh mint chewing gum with them on runs, because after a while you've been eating so much sugary stuff, you want to refresh your mouth. And we thought, well, let's try it. And they've gone down really, really well. So I'd say in the next few months, look out for another iteration. I'll never say never, but I don't see us getting in the game of having loads of multiple flavors though. I think that
I'm a fan of the simplicity, man. I really think there's something to be said for that. One of my favorite restaurants here in Singapore, just around the corner, it's a French place, does steak and chips. You can get a 200 gram, a 300 gram, and a 400 gram for $20, $25 or $30 with unlimited fries and unlimited salad. That's pretty much your choice. And it's brilliant. just takes all the guesswork out. You go there, you know what you're going to get, you know what you're doing.
Exactly. People can tie themselves in knots about all this stuff. When you see what people are taking in their nutrition bags and sticking on the top tube of their bike, you know, we've just had a couple of Ironman athletes get on the podium in global Ironman races, basically using these, you know, and whatever they're grabbing at the aid stations. That's it. Keeping it simple. Someone's actually just asked in the chat about a caffeinated version of the gel. It's definitely in discussion. The issue with caffeinated products, as most people know, is the effect on the flavor profile is catastrophic. So that's when you have to start using strong flavors to mask the thing. We definitely appreciate, though, that caffeine is a genuine ergogenic for a lot of people, and there's probably so it's not in the short-term horizon. I'm not going to pretend that it is, but we have mixed caffeine into the products. We've started playing around with it, and we will have the capability to do it at some point.
That's awesome, man. Awesome. All right, we've kept you nearly an hour, mate. So get out of here. Thanks so much. It's always very interesting listening to you, and it's great to hear how the new products came to be. Like, they're landing here on Tuesday, so we're going to get them out to as many people as we can, and hopefully everyone's going to love them.
Awesome. No, thanks for the invite to you both, and for everything you do, you know, for PH and now PF. We love being associated with you guys. Be great to come back through Singapore when we can get back on an aeroplane, and when we next get out to Australia, we'll come and see you. For sure, and I'll be keen to come up and have one of those barbecues you're talking about. Anytime, mate. You're always welcome. Yeah. Cheers, Andy. All right. Have a good one. Thanks, bud. See you, man. Bye-bye.